angered isn't me. It's actually my husband, Andrew. My name is Amelia. I'm 38 years old. A cherished name given by my parents. I've always tried to live my life with positivity, but there was one time, the only time in my life, when I couldn't feel optimistic. It was back in my late 20s. When I decided to marry my now husband Andrew and visited his home for the first time. Even before going, "Be prepared, my parents are a bit odd," Andrew had warned me. But I, too carefree, thought it wouldn't be that big of a deal. "What? My parents are pretty out there too, quite the handful." That's how I responded. However, within minutes of arriving at his parents' home, I realized how naive I had been. Upon seeing me, Evelyn, my mother-in-law, frowned and said, "Bringing home some unknown woman all of a sudden, and to get married before Ella? What are you thinking, Andrew?" I was dumbfounded when Andrew suddenly got scolded. "If you keep saying that, I'll never be able to get married." And Andrew replied to Evelyn with a reluctant sigh. It turns out Evelyn had hoped that Ella, Andrew's sister, would marry before him. It's only natural for the firstborn to marry first. She had a strong fixation on this. It would make some sense if my sister-in-law Ella had a boyfriend or something. But she has barely left her room since middle school. According to Andrew, after Ella made fun of a friend's looks and turned her into a laughingstock, she herself got ostracized by her peers. She then declared, "People can't be trusted, they're the worst," and stopped going to school altogether. The problem lies with Evelyn and the late father-in-law, Samuel. They doted on Ella so much. "There's no need to go to a place with such horrible classmates. We'll support you for life." That they comforted her with. Ella took those words to heart, or rather, enjoyed them too much, and to this day, at 30, still receives an allowance from her parents, buying comics and games online to enjoy in her room. The only time she goes out is for anime events. Of course, the money for that also comes from her parents' wallets, and she doesn't work. What about living expenses? Of course, her parents pay for everything. Did Samuel's inheritance go to Ella? Apparently, the house caught fire several years before Samuel passed away, and most of the savings were used up in moving and other expenses. Evelyn, with hardly any assets left, refuses to work. She never gets out from her room. How Evelyn plans to continue taking care of Ella is a mystery. Anyway, Evelyn continues to spoil her. Since childhood, she doted on Ella and nearly neglected Andrew, who says, "If I wait for Ella to marry, I'll be more than just old, I'll be a skeleton." And so, Andrew had no intention of waiting for her marriage. Well, that's true. Evelyn was strongly opposed to our marriage, but Andrew had intended to marry regardless of opposition. He brought me home out of a sense of duty to report as an adult, not intending to listen to her complaints. Instead, "Well, that's the situation, so I'm getting married." He ignored Evelyn's complaints and unilaterally declared our marriage. Naturally, she vehemently refused to attend our wedding. "Don't worry, I wasn't planning on inviting you anyway." But Andrew also said. While I wondered if this was okay, I also felt that if we were to marry, there was no other way. And so, after getting married, we hardly ever returned to the in-laws' house or participated in anything like family gatherings. Evelyn herself doesn't seem to mind since she cares about Ella but not so much about Andrew. We also felt more at ease about it. But then one day, I was notified that Evelyn had collapsed at a store during shopping and was taken to the hospital by ambulance. I tried calling the in-laws' house, registered as her home number on her mobile phone, but no one answered, and it seemed our home was listed as the next contact. There's no way Ella wouldn't be at the in-laws' house. Typical of her, she probably pretending not to be home. Completely hopeless. It seems Evelyn had a myocardial infarction and needed surgery, so they were seeking familial consent. In a panic, I contacted Andrew, got his permission for the surgery, and then rushed to the hospital. Evelyn was unconscious for about 3 days after the surgery, but on the 4th day, she woke up, and by the 5th day, she was able to converse with the nurses. When we were informed by the nurses that she had been moved from the ICU to a regular room, we brought some clothes for her, but why is a stranger visiting me? What? Upon seeing me and Andrew, Evelyn didn't thank us but instead snapped at us. We didn't want to visit her either. But it's not like we have a choice when Ella wouldn't step out of the house for anything. Andrew was of the mindset that there's no need for us to visit her, was the stance. Thinking it would only cause trouble and be a hassle since we'd likely be unwelcome. But Ella refuses to go to places with lots of people like hospitals. Moreover, we had to talk through the door because she wouldn't come out of her room. Naturally, Andrew yelled, "In such an emergency, you could at least cooperate with the family. You can go to anime events, so you should be able to go to the hospital." But it had no effect. She just went silent, and the conversation ended there. So, reluctantly, we ended up visiting Evelyn in Ella's place. Andrew, infuriated by Evelyn's rudeness, told me, "You don't have to visit her anymore. Just leave her in dirty clothes every day." But that's hardly appropriate. It's a shared room, and dirty clothes would be a nuisance to the other patients and nurses. Since Andrew works during the day, I'm the only one who can bring her clothes to the hospital on weekdays. So I don't really want to, but I'll bear with it and go to the hospital, told Andrew. Andrew looked genuinely sorry. "If you ever get too fed up, just throw the clothes somewhere and run back home without going to the hospital," he said, but I thought, let's do my best as his wife. However, every time I showed up at the hospital, Evelyn would say, "The nurse said my daughter was here, and I thought it was Ella, but it's you, a stranger." She complained about not considering me her daughter, and how seeing my face made her feel worse, saying whatever she pleased. It was clear to me that this was harassment, especially since Evelyn knows very well that Ella wouldn't come to the hospital. There was even a time when she threw the things I brought at me, almost hitting another patient, and I had to apologize. Of course, she didn't apologize. I was the one who kept apologizing. With her acting however she pleased. "I don't feel like your daughter either, but I'm the only one looking after you now, so please bear with it," I retorted. Then Evelyn, "Ella would never say such a thing. You and Andrew are really not endearing," exploded. Of course, the nurses scolded us, and I had to apologize again on behalf of Evelyn, who refused to, but the situation didn't escalate further. Is there really no way to deal with this selfish Evelyn? After a stressful month, finally she was discharged. With her out of the hospital, we returned to our peaceful days, and to our joy, we found out I was pregnant. Andrew was overjoyed. It's still small and knows nothing yet. But he would come every day, pressing his ear to my belly. "Are you in there?" asking. Thinking he's silly, yet I understand his excitement and am happy he's so delighted about our child. As a mom and as a wife, I'm determined to give birth to this child healthily. My parents were also thrilled when we announced the pregnancy, and it has become their weekend joy to look for baby socks and clothes, even though we don't know the gender yet, so don't buy anything. Although I mentioned it, I'm a bit worried they might end up buying both boys' and girls' clothes anyway. In the midst of everyone being elated about the new life, we didn't tell Evelyn about the pregnancy. It was Andrew who said it would be better that way. Evelyn might start saying who knows what, being upset that her first grandchild would be my child, especially since we married before Ella. He seemed concerned about my mental well-being. I thought it might be better to report after the baby is safely born and things have settled down. Andrew believes even that isn't necessary, but I figured we'd just play it by ear, depending on the situation at the time. However, as the birth approached, Evelyn suddenly showed up at our house. I was contemplating pretending not to be home to avoid showing her my pregnant belly when my mobile phone rang with a call from Evelyn. It seems she heard the ringtone through an open window, as it was summer. Evelyn raised. "Come out here, now." Her voice. I usually keep my phone on silent mode, so why did I have the sound on today of all days? Cursing my luck, it was too late to do anything. With Andrew not home, I reluctantly opened the front door, and Evelyn squeezed through the slightly open door. "Why did you get pregnant?" As soon as she saw me, Evelyn exploded in anger. Not even glancing at my belly. It was as if she had known about my pregnancy from the start, leaving me dumbfounded. Then, "Some neighbor mentioned seeing you at the OBGYN, congratulating me on Andrew's wife being pregnant. What's there to celebrate?" Evelyn fumed. So, she had learned of my pregnancy through someone else. Despite choosing a hospital far from the in-laws' house, she found out anyway. Seeing my slightly pale face, Evelyn said, "It seems you do feel somewhat guilty for getting pregnant before Ella." She gave a completely off-base response. "I don't feel even a shred of such guilt. You should know, the first child to be born should be Ella's. We don't need a child from someone as shameless as you who doesn't understand family hierarchy." Evelyn then suddenly kicked my belly. Unable to protect my belly completely, I crumpled to the ground from the shock and pain of the kick. What should I do? There's no severe pain, but I felt a flow of liquid in my lower body. As I tried to flee from Evelyn, she grabbed my collar. "Understand this? The first to give birth should be Ella. Don't you dare have a child until Ella is married. Give up on giving birth." Then she kicked me in the back. I felt an uncontrollable flow of liquid from deep within me. My water broke. Evelyn continued saying other things, but in my panic, I couldn't listen, focusing solely on the emergency. Her leaving seemed like I was admitting guilt in her eyes as she spat out, "Got it now? We don't need your child." And left. Snapping back to reality at the sound of the door closing, I didn't know what to do. First, I had to check on my baby, so I called the hospital with trembling hands, rushed into a cab, and headed there. Unfortunately, Andrew was on a business trip for 2 days. His supposed supervisor had been hospitalized due to an accident, and with a shortage of staff, Andrew had to go. He tried to refuse, citing his pregnant wife, but they wouldn't listen, and he complained about it. "It's okay. I can manage on my own for a couple of days. Don't worry and just go on your business trip." I reassured him, now feeling extremely vulnerable. Tears streamed down my face from anxiety as I called Andrew, sobbing and explaining the situation. "Understood. Work doesn't matter at this point. You and the baby are what's important. I'm coming back right now, wait for me." Andrew returned by that evening, as he promised. There might have been complaints about him abandoning work. If they complain, I'm prepared to change jobs, so don't worry. But Andrew said, "I'm lucky to have such a wonderful husband." Fortunately, there were no issues with the baby, but given the proximity to the due date, we immediately prepared for birth. After the child was born safely, we should have been filled with happiness, but then Andrew said seriously, "Just because the child was born safely doesn't mean I can forgive my mother's actions." He was still furious about Evelyn's behavior on that day. Then came the fateful day. About a month after I was discharged from the hospital. From the morning, Andrew took me and our daughter, Grace, to the in-laws' house. He didn't ring the doorbell, but instead used his key to enter. Evelyn, who appeared to have been watching TV, was startled by Andrew's. "What? Why are you here all of a sudden? You should have told me you were coming." Sudden appearance. It was understandable why she panicked. The usual calmness was gone from Andrew, who didn't glare at Evelyn but entered with a cold, emotionless expression, making a loud noise as he opened the door. It was an unusually rough manner for him. Ignoring Evelyn's protests, Andrew headed straight for Ella's room. "What do you think you're doing?" Evelyn followed him. Andrew stopped in front of Ella's room, took a breath, and then threw his body against the door. The room had been locked at Ella's request, so breaking the door seemed the only way in. "Andrew, what are you doing?" Evelyn panicked. Without a word, Andrew kicked the door down. "Stop it!" Evelyn tried to hold him back, but Andrew brushed her off without a word. After a few kicks, the door was about to give way, and with a final charge from Andrew, it fell inward. Ella, in dirty pajamas with overgrown bangs, looked up in shock. "Come here!" Andrew grabbed Ella's hand and dragged her out of the room. Of course, Ella screamed, "No, stop!" But Andrew didn't listen. Tears filled Evelyn's eyes. "Stop it! That's cruel!" Evelyn sided with Ella, but her words didn't reach the furious Andrew. He threw Ella outside. "Go outside for once!" he shouted. Ella cried like a child, with Evelyn comforting her. "Why would you do something so cruel?" Evelyn raised her voice as if she were in the right. "What? It's kindness. A woman over 30, not working, making her mom pay for her living expenses while cooped up in her room? That is not kindness. It's not your place to decide that. Then can mom make that decision? No, you won't. Can't you see it's unfortunate for Ella to live like this? What? After having a heart attack, you still don't get it? You won't live forever. Who will take care of Ella then? Someone who can't even look after herself. Will leave money behind. Your concern is unnecessary. Then who took care of mom's hospitalization? Ella just stayed home. Amelia did everything. She just did it because she wanted to. It's not my concern. Yeah, but who will look after Ella if something happens to her? We won't. Or does mom plan to live another 100 or 200 years to take care of her? That's... And how is a woman who stays in her room going to get married? The first to give birth has to be Ella. Are you out of your mind? Andrew's words were too rational, leaving Evelyn looking at him in shock. She probably never thought deeply about it, believing she'd always be there to protect Ella. "Excuse my frankness," I said, causing Evelyn to look at me with disdain. If you and Samuel had properly guided Ella towards social reintegration, she might have already been married by now. But Samuel, now deceased, and you, allowed Ella to live without working, fulfilling all her desires, providing a life without hardships. She is now 30. It's almost too late for her to return to society, but postponing it further won't do her any favors. Job opportunities decrease with age, and without any special circumstances or social experience, she will have limited employment options. If you truly care for her, shouldn't you encourage her to go outside instead of letting her stay cooped up at home? It's only going to make things harder for her. Evelyn's face turned red at my words. You shut up!" she yelled. "Think becoming a mom makes you knowledgeable? I've raised 2 kids. I know much more about parenting than you. Don't meddle in family matters. Seeing Evelyn gasping for breath in anger, Andrew scoffed. Then it's a failure in parenting. You've raised a child who stayed in her room till 30 without ever working, and one son who has disowned you. Let me make it clear, I do think Ella is also a victim here. Someone should have strictly corrected her when they knew the reason she started secluding herself, emphasizing it was her responsibility. It's okay, she will manage everything. Maybe it's indeed better for her to start working now, she's smart. She'll find a job soon enough, Evelyn said, patting Ella's back. However, Ella looked pale. No. Impossible. And muttered. Andrew and I both were convinced it was hopeless. Evelyn must have realized it too. As long as I'm here, you will be fine. But she put on a brave face. Humph. Well, good luck living happily with Ella, who probably won't get married in her lifetime. Just don't involve me from now on. What? Evelyn's bewildered response was met with Andrew's mocking laughter. What? You thought you'd make me take care of you when you're old, and Ella can continue living her spoiled life? You're clueless. Evelyn was at a loss for words, apparently having exactly those thoughts. Well, according to you, Ella is supposed to get married, so maybe her future husband can support both mom and her. Nice family plan there. We'll do our part by ourselves too, Andrew said mockingly, his eyes not sharing the humor. Seeing this, Evelyn looked as though she was about to say it was over, her expression filled with despair. You're thinking of disowning me? You're only mom? Only mom? Don't make me laugh. I hardly felt cared for. You made me do all the household chores while letting Ella do whatever she wanted since we were kids. And kicking Amelia's belly during her pregnancy, as if I could ever forgive you for not only attacking me but also my wife. Andrew's sharp gaze silenced Evelyn, who just stared at him. Let's go. He placed a hand on my shoulder and said. Evelyn screamed after us. Please, think it over. But he didn't look back. After that, Evelyn tried reaching out multiple times through calls and visits. Please, at least take care of Ella. But he refused. It's absurd for someone who hasn't lived properly to ask for help so easily. Rejecting her with logical reasoning and keeping her at bay. Eventually, as our children grew, we moved away, leaving no contact information for her. We've completely cut ties. The last I heard, Ella couldn't stick to vocational training and was constantly fired from part-time jobs for being late or absent without notice. Shockingly, when Ella complained about being reprimanded for her lack of enthusiasm at one part-time job, considering it harassment, Evelyn went to the supermarket where she worked and shouted at them, thinking she was pitiable. It's likely Ella will never work properly. We need to make sure she doesn't depend on us in the future. Andrew and I agreed. The prospect of Ella living properly after Evelyn's gone is dubious, but thinking about it is too scary, so we try not to. Despite Evelyn's claims of leaving money and taking care of Ella for life, she ended up struggling financially. Even past 60, she worked part-time to support Ella. It should have been the other way around. It seems she finally realized she should have encouraged Ella to go out more, but it's too late. Evelyn feels the weight of having to carry Ella, who can't do anything for herself, for the rest of her life. As for me, after our first child, we quickly had a second one, and now we're a lively family of 5. Though I was worried at first, it turns out you can manage surprisingly well. Andrew helps with childcare and cooks 3 times a week. He might actually be better at cooking than me, and his repertoire of dishes seems to be larger than mine. He's also improved his baking skills, a hobby he started on his own, and recently, it's become common to see him in the kitchen with the kids on weekends. No matter how you look at it, he's a wonderful dad. However, it seems he's not good at cleaning. He's the type to clutter things up before realizing it, thinking if things are put together, they're tidy, and he struggles to decide what to throw away.